950 yards, iron sights only, no spotter, no artillery, no permission, just a man, a rifle, and the crack of a single round that would change everything. Private First Class Daniel Kowalski tightened his fingers around the M1 Garand as if he could will the rifle steady with will alone. The ridge smelled of wet earth and burned oil. The wind off the Scheldt carried a thin metallic tang that made every breath taste of iron. It was Aero 415 on October 14th, 1944. Hill 772 lay like an open wound above the estuary, and the road below it had become a highway for German guns. Danny had seen the tracks in the mud for 2 days. Armored columns, half-tracks, the low silhouettes of assault guns moving between tree lines like predators. He was 22. He came from a steel town where mornings started to the whistle of a mill, and men learned to measure life in shifts and overtime. That background taught him 2 useful things for a war nobody had prepared him for: how to keep his hands working when his head threatened to stop, and how to notice small mechanical truths others dismissed. In the barracks at Fort McClellan, he was a marksman on paper, but he learned his real lessons at night, taking apart rifles, testing holds on broken car frames, pacing distances between telephone poles until the numbers in his head matched the world outside. The instructors taught doctrine. Danny learned trajectories. Around him, the squad moved like a clock wound tight. Sergeant Harlan Reeves had the slow, practical authority of a man who'd watched recruits become ghosts and still believed in order. Corporal Ellis joked to keep his hands from shaking. Lieutenant Hargrove called out clipped positions into the field phone, trying to wring artillery coordination from radios that had already been tasked elsewhere. "No support," Hargrove said flatly when Reeves radioed. "Hold your ground." Reeves looked at Danny like he was keeping a secret the rest of them didn't need. "You on that road, Kowalski. You see anything, you call it. We'll try to delay." The order sounded thin over the mud. The road Danny watched ran down the slope in a single pale slash that vanished into fog and a line of poplars. The intel had said probes. The ground had said armor. By OR 500, the silhouettes became shapes. Engines rolled with a sound like distant thunder. 3 assault guns, low and squat, eased up the sunken lane, their short, thick barrels pointing forward like the jaws of animals that had forgotten fear. A platoon of infantry fanned out behind them, dark shapes that moved with the practiced silence of men who had learned how to breathe without being noticed. The lead vehicle cut a channel through the fog at 950 yards from Danny's position. Doctrine said, "Don't waste rifle ammo on armor." Doctrine said the Garand's effective range against moving armored vehicles ended well short of this. Doctrine was right most of the time. It had been written for average men under average conditions, and the Army preferred averages because averages were safe. That was what Lieutenant Hargrove believed, and he said so in the low, precise voice of an officer quoting regulations. But rules are brittle things in a field where someone must patch a hole and hope the patch holds. Danny had been practicing a patch of his own. Over weeks of long shifts and stolen practice, he had built a table of holds and mile adjustments that looked like scribbles to anyone who would read them in a hurry. He had learned to watch the way a 30.06 round arc out, and then, under certain speeds and at certain elevations, flatten into a shallow line for a few precious yards before dropping again. It was a curiosity at the range. In a fight, it might be something close to a miracle. He felt the old pull the way a man feels cold water on his skin. The first StuG would be in range for him if he could keep everything steady. He thought of the picture stuck inside his breast pocket, a photograph of his sister, hair pinned back, the same stubborn jaw he'd known since childhood. He thought of the mill whistle and the months of letters that told him what the world looked like when home kept spinning without him. There was a ledger in his head, a simple count. 1 life at home, 1 life on the ridge, 1 improbable technique. The balance tipped, and he realized he was already moving. Reeves spat into the mud and crawled to the lip of the foxhole. "Kowalski, you gonna waste that?" he muttered, not unkindly. Ellis made a low sound close to laughter. Lieutenant Hargrove's voice floated back from the command post. "Kowalski, conserve. You have no authorization." He cut off at the sound of tracked vehicles moving into a better firing arc. If the lieutenant knew what was in Danny's head, he did not show it. The first crew on the road were not looking for a rifle bullet at 950 yards. They had a job to do: advance, clear the ridge, set up to punch a hole in the salient. The driver of the lead vehicle hunched under a small vision slit, trusting the armor and the field. To him, the world began at the muzzle of his own gun and ended at the next tree line. He was not watching the high dark above the road. Danny settled the Garand into the sandbag rest, the metal cool under his palms. He flipped the peep sight with 2 quick fingers and found the thin line of the vision slit against the far slope. His breathing narrowed until it was 1 careful metronome. He thought of the numbers. Hold 3 inches high for this kind of temperature. Shift left 2 degrees for the wind. Compensate another half for the slope. And translated them into the muscle memory that had been forged on cold ranges and hotter nights in engine rooms back home. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a machinist at a press, focusing on the part in front of him, because if he did not, the machine would gouge, and the next man would have to fix it. "Now," he said to himself, as if a word spoken were a plan. He squeezed. The report cracked like a whip. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to a long, bright line. Tracer that was not tracer, a streak that seemed to hang between hill and machine. Time bent. The first round took roughly 1.8 seconds to cross the distance, exactly long enough for Danny to see the driver snap his head as if someone had struck him behind the ear. The StuG shuddered. The crew had not expected a hit. The lead vehicle lurched, tracks churning in the ditch, metal screaming on wood as the barrel dipped. Men spilled out of the rear and into the mud. Silence hit like a thing with weight. Then Reeves yelled, something that was half astonishment and half profanity, and the world reopened. The second StuG was yawing its turret to find the incoming. Soldiers shouted orders, rifles chattered on other parts of the line, and Lieutenant Hargrove slammed back through the field phone, voice gone raw with static. "What was that? Report! Who fired?" Danny's hands were shaking so hard he could not tell whether the tremor came from cold or from the sudden realization that his impossible shot had connected. Around him, the sergeant's eyes found his in a long, hard stare. "You!" Reeves barked. "What did you do, Kowalski?" He could have lied. He could have said he had only hoped and missed. He could have folded the picture of his sister back into his pocket and pretended the night had not changed. Instead, he showed them the scribbled table he had kept. Numbers, holds, the rough calculations of wind and elevation. He felt the old shame of someone revealing a trick learned on the sly, and a new, harsher feeling: responsibility. The men who had crawled from the hatch of the StuG were alive because of his round, and if there were consequences, they would land on him. In the minutes that followed, the road became a different kind of battlefield. The stalled assault gun smoked. Two men dragged a groaning driver into cover, and the second vehicle began to back away, its crew arguing like a living thing. Word moved fast along the ridge. A corporal on a flanking position popped up and jabbed a hand in the air, signaling an enemy withdrawal. Small victory, tactical significance unknown. Yet the crackling across radios and the cadence of marching orders that followed said one thing. Someone had altered the equation. Lieutenant Hargrove descended the ridge, boots slapping soft in the mud, face hard as a boot sole. His eyes took in the ditch, the charred track, then landed on Danny. For a long moment, he said nothing. Around them, men exchanged glances between doctrine and results, between rule books and the man who had just bent them. "You had no permission," Hargrove said finally, quieter than the earlier static. "You jeopardized position and discipline." "You stopped their lead," Reeves answered, without waiting, voice raw. "He saved lives." Danny realized in that moment how small and fragile the line between scandal and legend could be. On one side stood procedure, compliance, the comforting certainty that if everyone followed the manual, the world would behave like the pages promised. On the other side lay improvisation, the ugly, dangerous kind that sometimes worked and sometimes did not. He had crossed that line with a single squeeze of his finger. He did not know, yet, how many lives that bullet had changed. He only knew what it had done to the men beside him. The way Reeves's jaw loosened from anger to something that looked like respect. The way Ellis finally stopped snickering and looked at him as if he were someone he might owe a favor to, and the damp, stunned quiet that moved through the platoon like a tide. He thought of his sister's smile in the photograph and felt a pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with weather. Above them, the ridge did not celebrate. War does not have time for celebrations. The orders kept coming. The radio demanded positions. Men pulled themselves back into roles they had learned by habit. But somewhere between the ditch and the evaporating fog, a fact had been set. A rifleman had done the impossible. The rumor would not stay in their mouths long before it reached the ears of those who counted such things. At dawn, when the light began to chalk the horizon and the river below became a streak of pewter, Lieutenant Hargrove instructed a runner to send the report up the chain. Reeves clapped Danny on the shoulder with hands that had known too much and said one thing that was not a reprimand. "You kept your head. Don't go looking for glory." Danny slid his hand into the pocket where the photograph rested and felt the edges of paper under his palm. Glory had never entered his calculations. He had always kept accounts in small figures. Shifts worked, letters sent, a sister's name recalled like a prayer. Now, with the road smoking and men moving, and a field phone that suddenly buzzed with questions, he added one new line to the ledger. One round, one test, one result. He did not sleep that day. He cataloged what he had done in the only language he knew well, small numbers and precise holds. He wrote down the wind, the temperature, the angle of the slope, the exact time of flight as best he could. Men at the command post argued whether the shot was luck or skill. The rumor swelled into a report. An unknown rifleman with an M1 engaged armored targets at distances normally reserved for artillery. Someone laughed at the idea. Someone else swallowed and checked his watch. Late in the afternoon, the regimental adjutant sent a junior officer up the ridge to interview the squad. The officer leaned on the lip of the foxhole and pretended not to be curious. "Private Kowalski," he said, "we'll need a written statement." Danny stared at the paper he had already filled in ink from a borrowed pencil. He had measured the variables like a machinist measuring parts, He had expected skepticism. He had not expected responsibility. He knew two things with a clarity that had nothing to do with doctrine. One, the shot had been real. Two, the world had just become smaller in a way that left a spot open for invention. Today, the patch he had sown might hold. Tomorrow, someone in headquarters would try to unpick it. The sun lowered without ceremony. In the mess beyond the line, men ate in companionable silence. Danny sat with a mug and watched steam fog the air. He thought about the ledger he kept in his head, about the ledger that counted the cost of decisions. He thought about what would happen if the Army decided this was a method to be adopted. Training, doctrine, men moved into different roles. He also thought about what would happen if the Army decided this was a breach. Courts, reprimands, the weight of a single round blamed on a single pair of hands. He folded the photograph and tucked it into his pocket, not because he feared verdicts, but because he wanted to be able to feel the shape of home in his palm. Outside, the river moved on, indifferent. Inside, men loaded rifles, told jokes they did not feel, and listened for a sound they could not know whether to hope for or dread. The ridge had returned to its ordinary business of keeping vigil. Only now, under the ordinary, something else hummed, a possibility that a small, carefully calculated deviation from the rules could change outcomes that used to be fixed. E417 hours. 2 minutes after the first shot, the ridge held its breath. Then a second crack split the fog like someone tearing canvas. The lead StuG shuddered again and tipped into the ditch. The third vehicle spun its turret wildly, trying to find the invisible seam in the dark. Sergeant Reeves swore into his scarf and scrambled to the lip of the foxhole, eyes wide as flint. "Who fired that? Kowalski? Again?" The words were raw, half panic, half disbelief. There was no time for ceremony. The second shot did what the first had only hinted at. It stopped the advance. Men spilled from hatches, stumbled in the mud, rifles up, eyes searching for a threat they could not see. Down on the sunken road, the StuG crews cursed and bled, and somewhere along the column, a driver cursed a map and the luck that had put them under the ridge. The world narrowed to orders and reactions. Lieutenant Hargrove's voice cut through static. "All units, hold fire, identify." Then, quieter and desperate. "Who engaged armor at 950 yards? Danny's chest was a drum. Reeves grabbed him by the shoulder, as if to pull him back into place, or to keep him from falling forward. "You hear me?" Reeves demanded, not angrily, but like a man demanding that a machine continue to function. Danny could hear his own breath in his ears. Too loud, too ragged. He thought of the photograph in his pocket. Marie's smile blurred at the edges by a thumbprint. He thought of the mill whistle and the cold presses that had taught his hands precision. That memory steadied him more than courage ever could. Within the hour, the ridge had changed status from a skirmish line to a controlled experiment. A jeep from regimental headquarters arrived with a weapons tech and an ordnance sergeant carrying a clipboard and a battered chronograph. The officers moved like men shifting into a different skin, from the rough certainty of the foxhole to the clinical language of trials. "We need replication," the ordnance man said, without malice. "If this is a fluke, we bury it. If it's repeatable, we adapt." They measured everything like mechanics setting up a delicate press. Tape on the ground for exact distance, sandbags leveled, wind measured with a small, spinning vane. Danny found himself repeating the motions that had become muscle memory. Shoulder, cheek weld, the way the peep sight lined over the far slope. The first supervised round landed within yards of his original mark. The chronograph recorded muzzle velocity, the anemometer spit numbers. A radio operator scribbled down times. Then he fired again, then again. Each round erased the possibility that it had been luck. When other men tried, the results split into two truths. Some could hit reasonably well after a few tries. Others could not. Corporal Ellis, with steady hands and other tasks, missed by a wide margin on his first attempt, and then found a cadence that worked on his third. A private with bad eyesight never achieved the needed precision. The ordnance man frowned at the variance and wrote numbers in columns, the way a man notes tolerances and failures. Repeatability is partial, he said. Skilled operator required. Environmental windows narrow. That language, repeatability, operator skill, environmental window, moved up the chain like steam in a kettle. Battalion called brigade. Brigade sent a rough recommendation. Formal trials in controlled environments. No operational application until doctrine guidance from Corps. Corps, predictably, wanted reports and suggested a secure range away from civilians. Orders trickled down to the company. Keep the technique confined. Gather data. No improvisation. The Army's machine began the slow work of converting a man's improvisation into institutional knowledge, and every step added pause, caution, and paperwork. It was not only paperwork that complicated things. The human parts were sharper. Men began to argue not about technique, but about consequence. On the ridge, a forward observer spoke plainly to Hargrove. If we use this, will logistics get lazy? Will planners stop pushing for artillery because some rifleman can stop a truck here and there? Hargrove's jaw worked. We adapt to solve problems, he said, not to replace missing capabilities. But in the mess that night, a sergeant from another company admitted, voice low. If one man can delay an ammunition column, that's hours. Hours can break an operation. Danger lived in those hours. 2 days after Danny's tests, reports came of a misapplied shot on a different sector. A lieutenant, keen and proud, had authorized an unvetted long-range interdiction against a moving truck suspected of resupplying enemy positions. The shooter misidentified the target in dusk light. The round struck a farmhouse that had been pressed into billet for displaced families. That image, children running from shattered glass, went up the chain faster than any technical report. It added a new word to the vocabulary of the technique: liability. Now the conversation was no longer only about ballistics. Ethics and prudence crowded the map room. The ordnance man shrugged one afternoon and said, "We can teach measure and hold. We cannot teach conscience." The intelligence captain, spare and efficient, insisted on identity confirmation procedures and mandated standoff safety margins. The colonel, a man with a map of scars on his hands, balanced the math on a sheet, estimated saved lives versus the risk of misapplied fire. If this is a force multiplier, he said, we must formalize who is authorized to employ it. Authorization became the hinge on which the technique pivoted. The division issued temporary guidelines, only under direct supervision, only by selected volunteers with proven visual acuity, and only when artillery and air support were unavailable. They drafted a short syllabus for a pilot cadre: measurement drills, chronograph readings, environmental assessment, target identification protocols. Danny, by virtue of being the originator, found himself in the awkward position of instructor. Teaching was plain work, no glory, just repetition. He learned to speak the method without romance. Check wind 3 times, note barrel temperature. Hold 3 inches high at this elevation. Wait 1 beat after the breath. Squeeze. The training exposed human limits. Not every hand could be taught the micro-adjustments. Some men's eyes were too blurred from dust and smoke. Some could not hold a rifle steady for a second. Others, surprisingly, had a knack and improved quickly. The ordnance man kept a ledger. It was neat, merciless. Trainees, rounds, confirmed hits, misses, environmental notes. The math said a small cadre might be dependable. The math also said it was not scalable overnight. Meanwhile, the story hardened into reputation, and reputation invited scrutiny. A reporter from an Allied liaison unit heard whispers and came up the ridge under a hot sun, notebook ready, eager for the type of human angle that read well to families and funders. He watched a supervised series of shots and recorded the ordnance man explaining tolerances. He wrote a paragraph about a private who turned a rifle into an instrument of interdiction. The paragraph traveled differently than the reports. It became a headline in a field newsletter, then a rumor in a supply line, then a caution in a brigade bulletin. Danny found the exposure double-edged. Men looked at him with a mix of gratitude and expectation. Reeves clapped him on the back when the crate arrived with ordnance-approved ammo. "Don't let it get to your head. Do the job and go home, kid." Ellis, who had once mocked him, now asked detailed questions he wouldn't have risked before. Yet there was also a tension in the eyes of officers who had not witnessed that morning. Curiosity wrapped in unease. The colonel's face haunted Danny that evening when he visited the command post. "If this becomes doctrine," the colonel said, "we change training, supply, and risk calculus across the division." He looked older than his years. "That's not only tools, Kowalski. That's organization, and organization moves slowly." The meetings convened and adjourned, the memos piled up, and the work of classification began. Tactical interdiction, restricted application, training cadre, ordnance verification. For all the war's urgency, the system that wins wars is one that can absorb novelty without breaking. That meant ironing the edges, building checkpoints, and feeding the story into institutional procedures. But the ridge kept its own, sharper weather. At dawn the following week, intelligence radioed that a supply convoy expected to cross the sunken road might shift its timetable to exploit nightfall. Battalion asked if the cadre could attempt a deliberate interdiction under strict oversight. The colonel, after pacing his tent for hours, said yes. This would be the first operational test under authorized conditions. When the night came, the tension felt like a drawn wire. The team established positions, scopes obscured, not to hide skill, but to prevent distraction. Danny did not fire. He supervised, calmed, and corrected. The shooter they had selected, an old marksman from a coastal battery turned infantryman, breathed, aimed, and squeezed. The round struck true, snagging the rear axle of a truck and sending its load into the ditch. The convoy faltered, the column slowed, supply hours were lost. Messages flashed up the chain, measurable interdiction confirmed. In the command tent, the colonel and staff sifted through teleprinter reports. "This is not a miracle," he said into the cigar smoke. "It's a new form of applied skill. It buys time if we have no other choice." The notation was cautious and precise, the recommendation careful. Form a pilot cadre, limit application, require ordnance verification, mandate target identification. When Danny walked back to his foxhole that night, the ridge felt both smaller and somehow more perilous. He had taught men a trick that could save lives and cost them. He had seen a kid miss and a farmhouse broken. He had seen a convoy stalled and a platoon breathe easier. He had become, without permission or ceremony, a variable in a system that would count the pros and the cons in columns. He opened his small notebook and added numbers like entries in a ledger, confirmed interdictions, collateral events, trainees able to repeat within tolerance, trainees who could not. There was a new weight in his pocket, not the photograph this time, but a memorandum stamp, selected for pilot instruction under ordnance supervision. It was neither commendation nor condemnation. It was a marker that his private experiment had been noticed and folded into something larger. He understood fully now that what begins with a single, desperate choice can become, in the hands of many, a standard or a scandal. He did not know which it would be. He only knew that the next time he closed his eyes at night, he would hear the crack of distant metal and the ledger in his head, balanced carefully between saving and costing lives. October 23rd, 1944. 6:30 hours, Division Headquarters, 5 miles rear of Hill 772. Colonel Elias Thorne slammed the field report onto the map table, scattering pencils and ashtrays. 950 yards, iron sights, 3 confirmed StuG kills in under 4 minutes. And now this cadre report, 5 interdictions last week, 2 enemy convoys stalled, 1 command truck disabled. Who the hell is Private Kowalski? The room froze. 6 officers, 2 majors, a captain from ordnance, an intel lieutenant, and Thorne's executive officer, stared at the typed pages. Outside, rain hammered the canvas tent like machine gun fire. Thorne was 48, a West Point man who'd survived Kasserine Pass by sheer math, counting shells, lives, and retreats. He didn't believe in miracles. He believed in numbers that added up. Captain Lyle from Ordnance cleared his throat. "Sir, the tests replicate 72% with trained shooters. Variance drops to 15% under ideal wind. But scaling? Scaling," Thorne cut in, voice like gravel. "That's the word. If one mill rat with a Garand can gut a StuG column, what happens when we train a battalion? Or do we court-martial him for wasting ammo?" The exec officer, Major Hale, leaned forward. "Permission denied initially. He fired without orders. Battalion's already got a reprimand drafted." Thorne's fist hit the table. Maps jumped. "Reprimand the man who stopped an assault, while our 105s are retasked to Antwerp? Get Hargrove on the line." Radio static crackled. Hargrove's voice came through tinny. "Sir, Kowalski's cadre interdicted a fuel truck last night. 20 tons denied to Jerry. Confirmed by recon flyover." Thorne stabbed the push to talk. "And casualties? None ours. 1 civilian truck clipped. Empty. Locals confirmed." Silence. Thorne hung up. "Civilian truck. There's our headline. 1 wrong shot and we're the monsters." Captain Lyle slid forward a ledger. "Numbers, sir. Cadre of 12, 28 interdictions attempted, 19 hits. Saved estimated 140 man-hours of artillery prep. Enemy losses, 7 vehicles, 22 KIA confirmed. Cost, 1,400 rounds expended." Major Hale whistled. "That's 74 rounds per kill. Bazooka teams burn 200 for 1. Thorne paced. "But Doctrine says rifles don't engage armor. FM 7-11, page 47. We rewrite that. Training changes. Ammo allocation shifts. Every platoon needs a standoff specialist. Supply chain buckles." The intel lieutenant piped up. "Jerry's adapting, sir. Reports of paired scouts now. If they mass infantry screens, then we mass rifles," Thorne snapped. He grabbed the phone. "Corps, Thorne. Need Doctrine green light. Pilot program, 104th only." Corps was skeptical. "Negative, Colonel. Risk to civilians too high. 1 farmhouse hit last sector. Press will crucify us." Thorne's face reddened. That farmhouse was empty. Technique saved a platoon from overrun. Paperwork says otherwise. Stand down. Thorne slammed the receiver. Room went dead quiet. Then Lyle spoke. Sir, if we bury this, we don't bury, we prove. Thorne jabbed a finger at Danny's photo. Grainy recon shot taped to the report. Get Kowalski here. Full demo. I'll call Ike's staff if I have to. By noon, Danny rode in a muddy Jeep, stomach churning. Reeves rode shotgun, silent. Keep it simple, kid. Numbers, not heroics. Division CP was chaos. Typewriters clacking, phones ringing, aides running dispatches. Thorne met them at the flap. Steel gray eyes sized Danny up. Private, show me. They drove 2 miles to a fenced range. Targets, wrecked StuG mock-ups at 900 yards. Wind 7 mph gusting. Ordnance crew set chronographs, anemometers, spotters with theodolites. Danny's hands shook loading the Garand. Marie's photo burned in his pocket. One miss here, and it's over. Fire when ready, Thorne barked. Danny breathed. Wind left to right. Hold 2.8 inches high, mil 14. Squeeze, crack, spotter yelled. Hit, driver slit dead center, time of flight 1.82 seconds. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Again, second round, crack. Confirmed, turret ring penetrated. Third, crack. Fuel cap struck, simulated breach. Thorne grabbed binoculars. Goddamn, reload. Ellis, your turn. Ellis, pale, missed wide by 6 yards, then hit on third try. Lyle clocked it. Muzzle, 2610 FPS. Back at CP, Thorne lit a cigar. Numbers don't lie. Corpse wants proof. They got it. But proof brought knives. That night, MPs hauled in a private from another company. Tried the Kowalski hold on a suspected OP. Hit a Red Cross truck. 2 nurses dead. Room iced. Thorne's cigar dropped ash. Who authorized? Read the bulletin, sir. Approved technique. Danny's gut twisted. Those nurses. Faces like Marie's? Hale muttered. 1 dead kid undoes 10 saves. Thorne stood. Meeting's over. Lyle. Cadre down to 6 men max. Mandatory 2-spotter confirmation. No night shots. Hargrove. Kowalski on report. Unauthorized origin. Danny's world tilted. Sir, save it, Private. You opened Pandora's box. Now we nail it shut. But Thorne didn't nail it. Next morning, he wired Core. Range demo. 89% hit rate. 12 shooters. Interdiction saved 3 platoons last month. Recommend limited Doctrine Annex FM 1711. Core buckled under pressure from Army Group. Ike's staff wanted data. By week's end, green light for rifle standoff interdiction, provisional. Training, 1 per platoon, 40-hour course. Ammo, special lot, tracer marked. Danny taught first class, 20 men, freezing rain. Wind shifts 2 MP, recalibrate, civilian shadow, abort. 1 trainee nailed it first try. Another clipped a dummy barn. Lesson learned. November the 2nd, Schelt cleared. Canadians linked up. 104th pushed to Rhine. Kowalski technique credited with 47 confirmed interdictions, 312 enemy KIA disabled vehicles, but cost 8 misfires, 3 civilian deaths, 1 friendly wounded. Danny got Bronze Star, quiet ceremony. Thorne pinned it. Saved more than you cost, son, but never forget the ledger. Danny saluted, pocketed the ribbon, stared at Marie's photo that night. 1 shot started it. 1 farmhouse ended the dream. Back home, 1946. Danny worked the mill again. Letters from Thorne. Technique and manuals now. Saved lives in Korea. Danny burned them, kept only Marie's photo. The ledger balanced in silence. 47 saves. 3 costs. 1 man's hands. War's math never sleeps.